wondered how trailblazing risk leaders navigate uncertainty with finesse and confidence? Uncover the surprising connections between their personal journey and professional prowess, and get ready to learn and elevate your risk management game with the RiskMasters Podcast. Join host Julian Hay in collaboration with Risk.net as they delve into hidden gems of risk leadership through engaging conversations and thought-provoking insights from board directors to chief risk officers and business leaders.
Bonjour, and welcome to the first episode of RiskMasters with Terri Duhon. Terri has had a phenomenal but unorthodox career path, where her personal and professional life came together, leading her to where she is today. She is a non-executive director on 4 boards, and chairs 2 risk committees, including one for UK PLC, a UK-listed company. She brings a unique perspective on the role of the board, especially when it comes to risk management. So today we will explore with her 1, her career path and the choices she had to make it to where she is today, 2, how to get on the board and the board dynamics, and 3, the view from the board, especially when it comes to risk management, corporate culture and psychological safety. You will find more information on my website, julienhay.com, including the transcript and the notes of today's episode, as well as tons of thought leadership articles on risk management and leadership. And now more about Terri. Terri played a pivotal role in the global development of the credit derivative market. Her expertise and contributions have garnered attention from notable media outlets, including the book Fool's Gold and PBC's Frontline. She's an award-winning educator and TEDx speaker, and author of the acclaimed book How the Trading Floor Really Works. She currently serves on 4 boards, including as non-executive chair of Morgan Stanley Investment Management Limited and non-executive director on the board of Wise, a payment company. But Terri's influence extends further, as she's also the ambassador for Women on Board and an associate fellow at the Side Business School and a motivational speaker for Speakers for Schools. And now, here is Terri. Terri, welcome to RiskMasters. It's a pleasure to have you here today with us.
Exciting to be here. RiskMasters, I love that title. Maybe that makes me a risk master, maybe.
We are going to go through that today. You have a fantastic career, so I think that was the opportunity. In fact, you're doing the opening for us as well. So we're starting on a high. You've been having a fantastic career since you started at JP Morgan as a derivative trader, if I'm not mistaken. Then we could spend a lot of time on what you've done, by the way, but I will go straight to what you're doing today. And you're a non-executive director, I think, at Morgan Stanley International, Rathbone Brothers PLC, and also Wise, a payment company.
Yeah, big fun fintech.
And you also wrote a book, if I'm not mistaken, How the Trading Floor Really Works, which was probably a bestseller in its category.
Oh, well, yeah, it was a real page turner, like 50 Shades of Grey.
Yeah, and I also really enjoy your TEDx talk, and we are going to come back to that and talk clearly a little bit about the corporate world and your current roles. And explore a little bit more about some cultural aspects you mentioned as well during that talk.
Okay.
But to start with, we are actually going to look in a little bit more on the personal and your career side. And when I look into everything you've done, everything you do today, my first question to you is, how do you do everything you're doing?
That's a great question, actually. I think it's an excellent question because it sort of speaks to that issue of, oh, women can have it all. Or let me put it another way, parents can have it all. And the truth is that actually, when I was first pregnant, someone said to me, Terri, you're going to make compromises everywhere, every day, as soon as you have a child. And you're always going to compromise. And you have to figure out whether the compromise is worth it. And I was pregnant, so it was my first child. I didn't know what she was talking about. And ultimately, do I think of it as a compromise? A bit, because you think about all the people and all the things that need your time. So that, there's your children, there's your partner, there's the rest of your family, there's there's your career, there's your friends, There are so many pulls on your time, and you have to decide how you spend it. And then you have to make sure that all balances. And when I say balances, I mean that you're spending for me, it's about spending the appropriate amount of time on the appropriate thing in a way that still, at the end of the day, I can be happy with the choices I've made. And let's be honest, that does mean that in some cases, taking into account the various responsibilities and joys that one has as a parent, sometimes it meant making different decisions in my career. Now, do I consider them compromises? I'm not sure, but for sure, being a parent made me think very carefully about whether I loved what I was doing or not.
And so would you say that being a parent is the reason why you're on the board of those corporates today?
I would say absolutely. I think back that actually, had I not become a parent, would I have left the big corporate world the way that I did? And would I still be trying to climb up the ladder and be, run the whole big corporate? I don't know, actually. But what I do know is that I love 100% where I am today, 1,000%. So to some extent, being a parent has led me to where I am today, and I love where I am today. So actually, it's been a win-win, I think, at the end of the day for me.
And I'd like to build on that a little bit, right? Because we all have in our careers ups and downs. And on your website, I think you mentioned that you dreamed big, and you had also epic failures along the way that actually taught you more than the wins. So what did you find the most challenging to overcome in that journey, and how did you bounce back from failure?
I try, whenever I have the opportunity, I try to focus on the fails, mostly because I found that in the world of finance, particularly, many people are really excellent at bigging themselves up. And it's all about the big highs in their career. And for anyone coming after them, it looks almost unachievable. It looks impossible. Like you must have been a superstar to do all the things you did. And the truth is that I'm pretty sure that most people, failure is hard, and most people shy away from talking about it. Not that they're trying to be misleading, but it's emotionally difficult to talk about for some people. And as a result, it doesn't help those coming behind to think that what any of us have done is achievable by the next person, because of course it is. I was fired, for example, once. And I deserved it, actually, with hindsight. But thank God I was fired, actually, because it then led to something even more amazing. I built a business that failed. I mean, spectacularly. Lots of different things I tried. I got no. And they were all really, it's hard to hear no. It's hard to hear you're not good enough, or you're not the right person, or I don't really understand what you're selling here, or, the thing I often talk about is the getting to the boardroom, which of all the things I did in my life, it was the hardest. Now, to be fair, it could have been the stage I was in my life. I had just had baby number 2, and then very quickly baby number 3. And getting to baby number 2 was a really hard path of miscarriages and IVF and like really difficult emotional ups and downs. So baby number 2 comes, and then I'd forgotten what it meant to be a parent of a baby. And it was incredibly suddenly stressful and scary. How do I do this? And how do I manage? And then baby number 3 came so quickly after. And then I actually think I had a bit of depression through that period, which, with hindsight, probably was to be expected given some of the highs and lows that I was going through at the time. But it was also the time I then chose to make a leap into the boardroom. So having kind of physical and emotional significant changes going on in my life, and then rocking up into Headhunter and saying, hey, I want to sit on a board. And they're like, pass, hard pass. Didn't make me feel great. Did not add to the joy in my life, I can say. And it was the hardest thing I think I've been through is pushing through a barrier. And it was a barrier because I was coming from a super non-traditional pathway into the world. And literally everyone was telling me, this is not how you do it. This is not how it's done. Now, little did they know that if you say to me, this isn't how you do it, then that's like red flag to a bull. Like as soon as you tell me, oh, this isn't the way it's done, you've got to eat with this fork, then immediately I want to eat with the dessert spoon. It just makes me so angry.
And it works.
Yeah. But it came at a tough time. So I probably should try and distinguish between what was going on in my personal life and what I was trying to achieve with my career. And yet actually they're one and the same because I'm a human being.
Yeah.
But it was really hard. And I had to rethink how I was presenting myself, the language I was using. It was almost, and a lot of people get a little bit concerned when I say this because they think, oh, you had to pretend to be someone you weren't. And actually I describe it, it's like I had to learn to speak a different language, right? The people in the boardroom, the people I was trying to meet with and look credible to and be part of that little world, they looked and sounded different than I did, in the same way that someone in the US looks and sounds different from someone in the UK. And I needed to be able to speak their language.
And that's an interesting distinction, right? Because I think what people will react on at that point will be, well, you try to conform, but that's not what you're saying. What you say is that you wanted to effectively communicate with them.
No, it's about effective communication. And look, it's really interesting, this distinction, because it makes a lot of people really nervous. But the extreme is if you go to the trading floor, and for any of you who have been on the trading floor, you'll recognize that it's a pretty aggressive method of communication. And it's a very specific way of communicating. It's quick, it's sharp, it's concise. But it's also, it's abrasive and it's slightly aggressive. And the bad words are abundant.
Right?
Yes. In any language. And you could not take that conversation and drop it into a boardroom. You would literally, people would have a heart attack. Just another example, in the boardroom, when you have people from different cultures coming in or from different industries coming in, it is fascinating how abrasive they are when they first come into the room, and how slowly we all navigate a way so that they can communicate with us and we can communicate with them in a way that's constructive. And so a board naturally finds a smooth path through those different voices that a social structure doesn't always. But to get to the boardroom, you have to be able to, somebody has to recognize that you can do that and you can contribute. So it's more about psychology and sociology, isn't it, than it is about capability to some extent, because
it's communication, right?
Loads of us have the capability, I think, to add tremendous value at board level, but getting it across in a way that somebody wants to invite you in is what you have to figure out.
But that's what enables you to bring the value you bring to the boardroom. So, and for me, not losing who we are, but adjusting to the audience is always required. And the higher people go, the more that demand is on people.
Yeah.
That's what makes tremendous leaders, or not, if they come.
Or not.
And I have a few examples of that, but that's probably not for today. So I like actually to build on what you talked about on the board. So I think it's a very good segue there. How would you describe the dynamic of a board going beyond what you just talked about? So in terms of strategy setting, and then we're going to dive a little bit more on the risk side, in terms of strategy setting first and how you oversee the overall organization.
I guess I'll take a step back and give a few perspectives. One is that the role of a board is oversight. And specifically in the UK, we are termed non-executive directors, which specifically means we don't run the business. We're non-executive. So we don't do the day-to-day. And so when you think about something like strategy, ultimately, the executives have to come. They have to have done a lot of work. And they come to the board and they present a strategy. And then the board says, have you thought about this? And how did you come to this conclusion? And particularly what I'm always looking for is, did you have a robust discussion? Did you have different perspectives in the room to challenge the choices you made so that those choices are as robust as they can be? I'm just looking, did someone just put this on a paper, like they wrote an A-level paper, like a university essay, or did you come together and really think it through and toss around ideas? And have you thought as big as you can? And for me, that's what I'm always, as a non-executive, it's not my job to put the strategy on the paper, but it's my job to challenge it. So I challenge and then I support. So once, I've challenged and we agree, okay, this is where we're going, this is what it looks like, then I have to be supportive in that, okay, this was a decision we all made, this is where we're going. Even if it turns out that maybe with hindsight, it wasn't the right decision, we can't blame anybody because we all sat around the room and agreed to it. So that is, we've challenged it, now we support it. But in supporting it, we have to hold the executives, we have to hold senior people to account. So when someone says, this is our strategy, and we as a board say, how are you going to measure its success? Yeah. We then have to track it. And one of the things we say in the boardroom often is, if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. So how are you measuring success? And how are you going to evidence to us as a board that you are hitting the milestones and achieving the things you want to achieve? And it takes a big picture strategy and it has to make it operationalizes the strategy because it makes you think, what is the time frame? What goals am I trying to hit? How am I actually going to achieve this? And there's a bit of a feedback loop because you sort of think, well, hang on, if I can't measure this, how do I evidence that I've actually achieved it? Then what am I achieving? And then it might feed back into the strategy and tweak it a bit so that it actually is something you can measure and you can achieve in a time frame that makes sense. The other thing as a board member that you sort of must be aware of, and this is not my strength, by the way. You walk into a boardroom and you have 3 hours. There are 10, 15 people around the table, different presentations. You've got maybe 10 things on the agenda. You as a non-exec, you might have the opportunity to make 2, 3 relevant, important comments or questions. That's it. So choose wisely, right? Your influence on a huge, I mean, you're the tail wagging the dog in a way. If you're not careful, you have 3 comments you get to make to influence positively this whole organization.
Yeah.
Right. And you meet as a board 4 or 5 times a year. Now, maybe you meet other times because you have dinner beforehand. You have an audit committee or a risk committee beforehand, or some other committee, or maybe you have a briefing on something. So maybe it's more frequently, but your influence is limited. Yeah. So you use your time wisely. And so when I say this is an area, I'm opinionated, and I'm not always informed. So I'm always opinionated and sometimes informed. And so I have to be really careful that I don't just jump in and give an opinion without really being informed and being thoughtful. And that actually what I'm saying is going to add value, and how is it going to be taken in the round? And I'm always, when I first joined a board, I'm incredibly conscious. And I say 2 things in the first board meeting. And then we get to the 10th board meeting and I've said 5 things. And then we get to the 20th board meeting and I might be talking the whole time. And then I'm like, okay, rein it in. You've gotten a little complacent here, Terri. You've actually got to listen. The job is to listen and then, and I know that my biggest challenge as an individual is listening. I'm really good at talking, as you can see, I'm prepared to talk, but I have to.
That's actually also a quality. So it's about reining in those qualities and balancing them out, isn't it? So Terri, I think it's an excellent segue back to how do you ensure that the board stays on top of the risk agenda and the executive team stays also on top of the risk agenda, that dynamic between the board and executive team on that topic?
A lot of people think that we can put risk in a box and assign it to the risk committee, and then it's done with. And then the risk committee does a bunch of magic, and then suddenly risk is managed. And the truth is, clearly, that's not how it works. And risk is part and parcel of return, right? So when you have a strategy, when you agree to a strategy, part of agreeing to a strategy is take some risk. And as a board, you have to not only acknowledge the risk you're taking, but accept some of it. So we talk about risk acceptance. So here we want to grow really fast. So we're going to take this kind of risk. Here we're less sure about this particular area. So we're going to take less of this kind of risk. And then there are risks that boards are never comfortable taking. So reputation risk, for example, or we do need to take this kind of risk. So we're going to put some capital aside for it. There's so many different ways to think about risk. And you can measure it, obviously, a lot of it, not all of it. Some of it you have to talk about, and it's more qualitative than quantitative. But importantly, what you want to know is that the business understands the risks that they are taking. So you need a risk team who can help with the taxonomy, who can help with the vocabulary, so that we're all talking about the same thing. And that we can identify risks and pull them together and think about them across the firm in the same way. And all of that, there's a whole risk management framework and taxonomy and risk and control self-assessment and lots of different, policies and procedures that we can think about putting in place. But mostly what I care about, because I hope that even, every organization eventually, that's a well-trodden path that you eventually get down and you get to a point where you have all of that in place. what's really important, though, is whether it's effective, right? So the question really is, who believes they own the risk? Who believes they are responsible for the risks?
Yeah.
And if it's not everybody in the firm, in the same way that everybody owns the culture and everybody's responsible for the culture, then you have a problem. And what you want to do is constantly kind of probe, I think, the risk culture. And so the things that are important to ask. So of course, in financial services, we talk about first, second, and third line. So the thing that we should always be asking is, so how long did it take for someone to identify a problem? How long did it take for someone to self-identify when they made a mistake? How long did it take for that person who everybody knew was a bit of a bully? How long did it take for someone to report that that person was a bully? How often do people raise their hands and challenge a process or a thought or an idea? We should be asking first line, we should say, are you sufficiently challenged by second line? Does second line add value to you in your process? Is second line coming in and ticking boxes? Or are they coming in and giving you food for thought when they provide challenge? And the problem with the board level is that we see very senior people. So we see very senior first line and second line and third line. And those relationships should be equivalent. You should see in the boardroom, you should see second line challenge first line. You should see first line challenge second line. You should see third line provide challenge. And if you don't see that in the boardroom, clearly that's an indication of something. But what we can't see is further down. So we have to be asking, when we get a first line business coming in to present on something, maybe a deep dive on something, and we say, what's your relationship like with the second line?
Yeah.
Do they add value? Do they challenge you? And, we need to be looking for evidence that first line is welcoming challenge as much as providing challenge to each other.
Yeah.
Right? And you can't actually measure that. So you have to, as a board, recognize that there are some things like some things that we can measure very easily and very quickly: market risk, credit risk, etc. The things that we've classically measured. But then there are other things that we can try to measure, but then we actually need to probe a bit. And we can never stop probing on those questions.
I do have a challenging question then for you there, because effectively one of my observations, having been on business side, board level, executive and risk side, is a lot of the risk function, and you kind of alluded to that, are more aligned to managing the processes of risk rather than managing the risk themselves. And I will set aside the question of first, second, third line in that context. And for me, they are probably more operationally aligned and they are strategically aligned. And so from that perspective, how do you see the risk function supporting the strategic agenda of the firm and their contribution into that? And I'm sure from where you stand that they actually pitch at the right level.
So I'll answer two things. The first is that in a highly regulated industry, it is inherent to the industry that we have a risk of box ticking, because we're all trying to be compliant with a set of rules that may not specifically fit our business, because the rules are meant to be for an industry rather than an entity, and that is very different. And so we have a whole group of people employed to ensure we're compliant.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, if we're not careful, those people feel like they're ticking a box rather than thinking. And that's our challenge as an organization, is ensuring that we're constantly thinking. So, I always pose the question to people, okay, we're now complying with this regulatory thing. Is it adding value? What bit is good for us and what bit is bad for us? And how do we think about this piece of regulation vis-a-vis our business? And did you get any value out of it? Or is it a box ticking exercise? And these are really important questions. And I can sense, there are some times when people answer that question and you can tell that they're giving the board the answer they think the board wants. And that's generally a more junior person. And then often you'll have a senior person come in and say, it wasn't that valuable. Or actually, we learned a lot about this. The rest of it is a bit painful. And so we have to be constantly saying, where is the value in what we're doing? Have we added value? And that is really critical. Now, the other part of your question is about strategy. And in different organizations, I've seen different approaches. But one approach that I like a lot is there's a particular, the second line has a strategic risk assessment. And it ties in a little bit with horizon scanning and emerging risk, because they're all kind of linked. And it ties in then with the strategy day. So it is, look, these are the risks in the industries that we are facing. This is how the industry is changing, and this could be a risk to us as a result. And then with that overlay, we then look at the strategy and we say, with those strategic risks in mind, how does the strategy, either we accept some of those risks as, things we can't do anything about, and we're just going to power through, or we think maybe we can manage some of those risks strategically. And I think that requires a CRO who is as commercial as they are risk aware. So that the CRO can have a very credible conversation among the rest of the execs when we talk about strategy. If the CRO always comes across as risk averse, then they can't ever, and box ticking, then they can't ever have that strategic input, because they'll be slightly sidelined by the business.
And the purpose of a business is to take risks. So you cannot deliver value if you're not taking some risk to start with. And
absolutely.
I'm an ex-trader. That's what we are paid for.
Absolutely. We take risk. That's what, and frankly, in the world of finance, that is what we do. We are risk-taking organizations, and fundamentally, we have to understand the risks we're prepared to take and the ones we're not prepared to take. And a CRO has to want to help the return on risk in a positive way, as opposed to just restrict risk. And getting that balance right for a CRO, I think is tricky. It's no different than the balance that a board member has to bring to the table. Because if a board member only talks about risk, or only talks about return, or only talks about one thing, then the execs start to think, oh my God, the board's really nervous. They're not letting us do anything, as opposed to, we've got to encourage them to take risk as much as manage risk.
And so with that, I think it's perhaps one last question on the board dynamic, if I may. What type of change or strategic difference or change in strategy would you like to see coming from the firm you oversee, from the 3 boards or 4 boards you sit on?
Oh, I don't know if I have an answer for that one. I'd have to think about that. I mean, I have never been on a board where, well, let me put it in, I have always been on boards where people around the table know what the issue is. They do know. And we may not always agree on how quickly or the exact steps, but we know the direction we're headed. And that, and honestly, sometimes there's debate about it, healthy debate, really healthy debate, maybe sometimes healthier and more frequently than you'd like it to be, but it occurs. And I know as a result of those debates, healthy debates, that we're in a good place.
But that's part of the role of the board, to have those discussions, right? And I think it's a segue to another aspect I'd like to talk about relatively briefly. And you alluded to that in your TED talk around people speaking up effectively, and that notion for me of psychological safety. And here you alluded to how do you resolve conflict, for example, and conflict is a part of running a business is necessary. So what do you see the role of psychological safety to be when it comes to managing risk and compliance?
So it's a really interesting question, and not one I've not really thought about it in that context, actually. Although in my TED talk, I did TEDx talk, I should clarify. I did, I put the onus on the manager. So basically, anybody who is leading a team of people has to take ownership of the culture within the people that they're leading, within the team of people they're leading. And you take ownership by making it okay for people to say and do things that are correct, that are appropriate for their business. And that has to include speaking up. That has to include speaking up. That has to include providing different perspectives. That has to include challenging, challenging existing processes, challenging new ideas, challenging, we should, there's a saying, which is, it's incredibly hard to disrupt yourself. But the truth is that it's actually easier than you think if you're prepared to listen and listen to the people around you and listen to perspectives. So to some extent, we're not all going to become old, creaky zombie businesses if we listen to people in our teams who actually oftentimes know better than any senior person, right? And it's about making it okay for them to, and so you call it psychological safety. I say it's just commercially sensible. Don't keep doing the same thing over and over if it doesn't make sense anymore. And question whether it does. And you can do that by often listening to your people. And that goes back to the point that you want thinkers. You want people who think. Yeah, sometimes you need people just to do. You sit down and you do this. It's a process that has to happen. But most people eventually want to think. And particularly in the world of finance, a lot of people come to it because they enjoy the thought, the thinking around it. And so we need to let them think.
The cornerstone of that is actually to enable the organization to learn from failure. And for me, it works at individual level in the same way it works at organizational level as well.
Yes, fail fast, right?
Fail fast. Fail fast. Failure is a learning opportunity.
And look, I actually think most organizations we wouldn't have had the same conversation 5 years ago. But because of the sort of technological need of everybody to digitize, electronify, and up their game on the technology journey here, over the last 5 years, it's been intense. Every organization has gone through some digital transformation program, such that actually we could all call ourselves tech companies rather than whatever we actually do. And tech enables in most cases, and we've all needed to get on that bandwagon. And that journey should have taught everyone that failing fast is absolutely critical. And if you can fail fast, then you can raise your hand and challenge, because that should go hand in hand. And when I say we should have all learned how to fail fast, gone are the days where you spend 5 years investing in a program, right? And then flipping the switch 5 years later. Because today, if that's what you do, you are 10 years behind, right? So you can't do that. You have to put something in place and then test it, and then put something else in place and then test it, and then change it and evolve and evolve and evolve and evolve, or add to it. We can no longer think in terms of the waterfall, big project and done, and then launch it and it's good for 30 years. That's not how it works anymore, right? I think we've all gone on that agile journey where fail fast is critical. And I would say that 5 years ago, maybe that wasn't so evident. I think it's much more evident today that is a lesson that many organizations have learned.
And you work for one of those, you work with one of those disruptors, because why is this in a financial space a case in point of how disruption can come very quickly, in fact, turn a sector in activity that was not exactly the fanciest one before into an extremely lucrative business that everybody wants to be in.
Yeah, absolutely. Wise has been an amazing experience and a fun one for me, because it's a fintech and it's naturally a disruptor. And the culturally, just the compare and contrast between what a bank looks like today versus what a fintech looks like has been a really fun exploration for me. And there's not good and bad necessarily. There's just very different and often for good reason. But the ability to learn from each other is probably it has been very valuable, I think, for me. So I bring some positives from a big established old banking world. And then I bring back some positives from in the other direction from a fintech kind of disruptor culture, and trying to find the best of both that applies in the right place. And that's been a lot of fun, actually.
And I think I'm going to have you back and we're going to explore that in more details, because I think it'd be fascinating to understand the nuances between that fintech, agile, and definitely much more established organizations. But not for today. So I'd like to move into perhaps a bit of a lighter note to close.
Yeah.
If you had a superpower, what would it be?
I want to fly. I think I don't know that it would add any value at all to my life. And yet I dream about flying. So it must be something that fundamentally is missing, some need I have to fly. I don't know.
So you're one of those UFOs we're seeing mentioning somewhere.
I don't know.
And what is your favorite book?
Every now and then I'll pick up something educational or highbrow or whatever, Sapiens or, something. But the truth is actually I relax by reading, and it has to be, sci-fi, fantasy, a bit of trashy romance. It's all good.
I'm completely with you on this one. What is your favorite inspirational quote?
That one is from, it's attributed on the internet, so that could be completely made up, as we all know. But the author of Peter Pan said, we are all failures, at least the best of us are. And for me, that's just brilliant. I mean, it's beautiful in its brilliance, right? It's beautiful.
And very aligned to the discussion we just had, actually.
Yeah, absolutely.
And where can people go to learn more about you?
I mean, look, I'm on LinkedIn. I'm not posting that much anymore. I have a website. I wouldn't say it's wildly exciting or sexy. I'm mostly on LinkedIn a bit.
And one last question for the people listening to us. For anyone who is up and running and emerging leaders, what one advice would you give them?
Look, I would say, frankly, make sure, right? Make sure you're doing the thing you love and something that you really enjoy. And if you're not, take ownership of where you're headed and do that by figuring out where you want to go, where you want to be, getting support from your boss, from your community, from, use the people around you to help you get on the path that will take you to where you want to be. You're most successful if you're making the right choices in your own life than if you're doing something that you think you're supposed to do, but you're not really loving it.
Well, Terri, thank you so much for your time today. It was a lot of fun. I think we covered a lot of topics.
We covered a lot of ground.
And look, I look forward to have you back on this show at some point. So thank you so much for your time and talk to you soon.
Excellent. Thank you.
It was such a treat to have Terri with us today, and there's so much to learn from her insights. And coming back to one thing she said, we cannot put risk in a box and be done with it. As recent events have shown us with SVB, Credit Suisse, risk is ever evolving and it demands more attention than ever before. In navigating these complexities, chief risk officers and their teams play a critical role. They enable firms to take the right type of risks and really provide invaluable food for thoughts to the entire business they work with. To dive deeper into today's episode and access show notes, transcripts, and more, please visit my website, julienhay.com. And remember, be bold, keep pushing the boundaries, keep having an impact, and never shy away from becoming the master of your destiny. To the next time.
Thank you for joining us on RiskMasters today. If you're ready to master risk and unleash your full potential, here's how you can take the next steps. First, head over to julienhay.com to discover even more valuable insights from our RiskMasters. We've got a treasure trove of knowledge waiting for you. Second, don't miss out on future episodes. Hit that subscribe button on your favorite podcasting platform. Stay tuned for fascinating discussions on risk management. And third, if you found today's episode valuable, please share it on social media. Help others discover the world of RiskMasters and embark on their journey of risk mastery. Remember, success favors the bold. See you on the next episode of RiskMasters.